Something strange is moving through our solar system. It isn't a comet. It isn't an asteroid. And according to the latest research, it shouldn't even exist. Astronomers call it 3I Atlas, an interstellar visitor drifting silently through the darkness. But now, after months of observation, researchers have traced its path backward, all the way to a region of our galaxy already infamous for one of the most mysterious signals ever detected. Coincidence or connection? Tonight, we follow that trail across the stars, from the edge of interstellar space to the possibility that 3I Atlas may not be traveling alone, and by the end of this journey, the final discovery might change how we see our place in the universe. Forever. It began quietly, the way many great discoveries do, not with a thunderclap, but with a flicker of light in a data feed. Late one evening, inside a small observatory in Hawaii, a telescope connected to the Atlas survey system picked up something unusual. The object was faint, moving fast, and didn't quite match the behavior of a normal comet or asteroid. At first, it seemed like another routine detection in a sky already filled with cosmic wanderers. But as astronomers looked closer, they noticed something that made their hearts race. It wasn't from here. The object was moving far too quickly to belong to our solar system. Its path didn't curve around the sun like an ordinary comet's. Instead, it cut through our celestial neighborhood like a traveler passing through, here for a brief visit before disappearing forever. The telescope's automated tracking flagged it as 3I Atlas, meaning it was the third known interstellar object ever found. The first was Oumuamua, discovered in 2017, and the second, 2I Borisov, in 2019. Now, in 2025, we had a new visitor, one that would challenge everything we thought we understood about cosmic visitors from beyond. At first, the data was simple enough, a dim streak of light moving across a digital star field. But when researchers traced its path backward through space, the numbers stopped adding up. Instead of coming from the cold emptiness between stars, 3I Atlas seemed to have emerged from a region of the Milky Way already famous for something else. An area where scientists had once detected one of the strangest signals ever recorded. It was as if this object had been flung directly from a place that had already whispered a cosmic secret. The first few nights were filled with excitement and confusion. Observatories around the world scrambled to confirm the sighting. NASA, the European Space Agency, and even smaller research centers in Chile and South Africa all turned their telescopes toward the coordinates. They watched as the object drifted closer, reflecting sunlight off its surface like a shard of polished glass. But what really caught their attention wasn't just its brightness. It was how steady that brightness remained. Normal comets flicker as they spin and release gas, but 3I Atlas glowed evenly, almost deliberately, like it wanted to be seen. The following week, amateur astronomers joined in. Thousands of backyard telescopes pointed toward the same patch of sky, and soon, images began flooding online. Each one showed the same eerie shape, elongated, smooth, and strangely symmetrical. It didn't look like the messy ice and rock mix of a comet. Some said it resembled a needle. Others compared it to a metallic cylinder, though that might have been a trick of the light. Still, the speculation had begun, and with it, a storm of theories. News outlets picked up the story, calling it another interstellar mystery. People remembered the controversy around Oumuamua, the first visitor that had sparked wild debates about alien technology. Scientists were careful not to repeat that chaos, insisting that 3I Atlas was most likely natural. But privately, some of them admitted that the early readings were odd. Its speed, its trajectory, even the faint glow trailing behind it, all seemed a little too precise. Weeks passed, and the object grew brighter as it approached the inner solar system. Spectroscopic readings showed traces of carbon and silicate, materials found in comets, but also something else, a reflective compound rarely seen in nature. NASA's Planetary Science Division noted the strange consistency of its signal. There were no major fluctuations, no irregular bursts of dust, no tail formation consistent with solar heating. In fact, 3I Atlas behaved like it was built to resist it. As the days turned into nights of endless observation, scientists began piecing together its route. When they projected its origin backward through the Milky Way, it led them to a place few expected, a dense star cluster near the center of the galaxy. That cluster had been studied before, not for its beauty, but because decades ago, radio telescopes had picked up a series of rhythmic signals coming from the same coordinates. Those signals had never been explained. Some thought they were pulsars, others suggested they were interference from old instruments. But now, with 3I Atlas seemingly coming from that very same spot, the question resurfaced: could it be connected? Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, researchers ran simulation after simulation. The numbers told a strange story. If 3I Atlas had indeed been ejected from that region, it must have been traveling for millions of years, possibly longer than humanity has existed, and yet it was in near-perfect condition. No fragmentation, no signs of wear. That fact alone defied logic. Space is harsh. Radiation, micrometeorites, and cosmic dust tear most small objects apart over time, but this one looked untouched. When the James Webb Space Telescope aimed its infrared sensors at the object, the readings only deepened the mystery. Its temperature profile was inconsistent with a simple rock or ice body. Some areas absorbed heat, others reflected it instantly. The data suggested that the surface might contain materials that scatter light in a controlled pattern, something that doesn't occur naturally. NASA didn't release those findings publicly at first. They wanted confirmation. They wanted to be absolutely sure. But even within closed research channels, whispers started spreading. By the time mainstream audiences heard of 3I Atlas, it was already being called the silent messenger. Online forums exploded with theories ranging from alien probes to ancient debris from a forgotten civilization. Scientists, trying to stay objective, focused on the data, but they couldn't ignore the odd coincidences. Every new measurement raised a new question. Every new answer led to a deeper unknown. In late September, when 3I Atlas passed the orbit of Mars, something unexpected happened. Several orbiters, including NASA's Perseverance and the European Space Agency's Mars Express, recorded a faint electromagnetic fluctuation just as the object came into view. It wasn't strong enough to classify as a signal, but it was structured, repeating, almost rhythmic. Engineers said it was probably background interference, but to those watching closely, it felt like déjà vu. The same pattern once heard from the region 3I Atlas had come from. For a brief moment, the world's attention turned skyward again. Scientists, journalists, and everyday skywatchers felt the same quiet thrill that comes with touching the unknown. The object, now fully illuminated by the sun, reflected a pale silver light. And for a few seconds, it shimmered, not just as a comet, not just as a rock, but as a question too big for easy answers. As telescopes across the world tracked it, the object continued its silent journey, cutting a perfect line through the void. Behind it, it left data, speculation, and wonder. Ahead of it, the open darkness of space stretched endlessly. Somewhere, far beyond our reach, its true story remained hidden, waiting for those who dared to keep looking. When the object was officially catalogued, it received the name 3I Atlas, a simple combination of letters and numbers that, on paper, didn't mean much. But the more people heard it, the more unsettling it began to sound. The 3I marked it as the third interstellar visitor ever recorded, following Oumuamua and Borisov. But it was the second part of the name, Atlas, that caught attention. It was named after the telescope system that discovered it, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System. Yet to many, the word carried a deeper weight. In ancient mythology, Atlas was the titan condemned to hold up the sky for eternity, a symbol of endurance and burden. Naming an interstellar traveler after that figure felt poetic, almost prophetic. And for some reason, it didn't feel accidental. Scientists often used automated systems to assign names, but this one resonated with an eerie kind of symbolism. Here was an object that seemed to come from beyond our solar system, beyond even our understanding. And it bore the name of the being who carried the heavens themselves. Coincidence or not, people couldn't help but notice the irony. Within days, forums and online science communities were buzzing with theories. Some claimed the name was a subtle nod from NASA or the scientific community, as if they knew something and were hiding it in plain sight. Others believed it was a random quirk, the kind of thing that happens when data and mythology happen to cross paths. But even the skeptics admitted there was something unsettling about it. When journalists began covering the discovery, they couldn't resist using the symbolism. Headlines like "Atlas carries a secret" and "The Skybearer returns" appeared across websites and newspapers. Late-night hosts joked about it. Podcasters speculated endlessly. The public was hooked again, just like during the Oumuamua craze years earlier. But behind the excitement, inside research centers and private chat threads among astronomers, a quieter sense of unease was spreading. It wasn't the name itself that troubled them. It was what the early data hinted at. As teams at NASA, the European Space Agency, and independent universities began analyzing the object's trajectory, they noticed a pattern that didn't quite make sense. 3I Atlas wasn't just passing by randomly. It seemed to have come from a direction that intersected with a region of the Milky Way known for its high-energy phenomena. To trace something like that back through time and motion required deep modeling, running simulations across thousands of possible orbital paths. And in every plausible version, it seemed to point back to the same mysterious place. The area was nicknamed the Veil, a patch of space near the galactic core where unusual radiation bursts had been recorded decades ago. Astronomers had always debated what caused them: supernova remnants, black hole interactions, or perhaps something else entirely. But now, with this object's origin seeming to trace straight back there, old questions were coming alive again. It was as if 3I Atlas carried with it a signature of that energy, like dust clinging to a traveler's boots. Around this time, the public fascination with the name took on a different tone. People began making connections. Atlas, the titan who held up the heavens, and now an object from the heavens appearing to carry something unknown into our solar system. Artists started creating digital renderings, turning the comet into a shining figure with outstretched arms. Poets and content creators called it the messenger from the burdened sky. It was myth reborn in modern form, science blending with storytelling in the only way humans know how, by trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. Inside the observatories, though, the mood was far from poetic. The scientists studying it knew that behind every myth, there's usually a misunderstanding of something real. They focused on what they could measure: its velocity, its spin, its reflectivity. But the more they analyzed, the stranger it got. Normally, an object moving that fast from another star system would show irregular tumbling, like Oumuamua did. Yet 3I Atlas spun with an unnerving steadiness, as if perfectly balanced. It didn't wobble, it didn't flicker, it moved like a machine built for endurance. One astronomer at Caltech described it privately as too well behaved for a rock. Another, at the European Southern Observatory, noted in a memo that its albedo, or reflectivity, was inconsistent across the surface, almost like panels, not rough terrain. These notes weren't made public at first, mostly to avoid fueling wild speculation. But inside research networks, word got around. People started asking, what if this wasn't just a coincidence? NASA's internal communications revealed something subtle but telling. The language in their official updates shifted from object to body, and from debris to visitor. These words were carefully chosen, but to anyone reading between the lines, they carried a tone of caution. It was as if the scientists weren't ready to say what they really thought. That maybe, Just maybe, they were looking at something that didn't fit any known category. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers continued tracking it night after night. The reports poured in from around the world. Its glow remained stable, its path predictable, its silence total. Nothing came from it. No signals, no changes, no sudden jets of gas. It was like watching a ghost pass through the sky. Some called it the silent atlas. Others joked it was holding up the heavens again. But beneath the humor was a genuine sense of awe. The mystery deepened when scientists traced its past trajectory and found that it had passed near another known interstellar region just a few thousand years ago, a region tied to unexplained gamma-ray bursts. There was no way to prove a link, but the data aligned eerily well. It was as if 3I Atlas had followed a route through the galaxy that led straight through places of cosmic violence and mystery. Each stop along that path raised new questions. Was this object simply traveling, or was it sent along that way by forces we don't yet understand? By the third week of its observation, people around the world began to feel that strange mix of wonder and dread that only the cosmos can inspire. The name Atlas kept echoing through news broadcasts and YouTube channels, always accompanied by dramatic music and wide-eyed speculation. But to those who sat quietly in observatories, watching that point of light crawl across the black, it meant something more. It was a reminder that the universe is vast and filled with stories we haven't yet learned to read. The name Atlas wasn't just an identifier, it was a metaphor for humanity itself, holding up our fragile understanding of the cosmos, trying not to be crushed by the weight of what we don't know. And as telescopes continued to capture that faint light from a visitor millions of years in the making, one thought lingered in the minds of everyone who looked up at it. Maybe the name wasn't chosen by chance after all. Maybe the object had carried that name long before we ever gave it one. When scientists first began mapping 3I Atlas's movement across the night sky, everything seemed ordinary. It appeared as just another faint object drifting quietly among the stars, its path predictable, its light steady. But as more precise instruments began tracking it over several nights, small inconsistencies began to show up, the kind that make researchers pause, recheck, and then stare at the data just a little longer than usual. At first, the measurements looked like noise, the kind of tiny errors that happen all the time in astronomical readings. A slight deviation here, a faint brightness shift there. Nothing alarming. Yet the more often they measured, the clearer it became that these tiny differences weren't random. The object wasn't just gliding through space as expected. It was adjusting, ever so slightly, but definitely adjusting. Its trajectory curved where physics said it should remain straight. When astronomers compared their results from Hawaii, Chile, and Spain, they realized they were all seeing the same pattern. Each observatory, independent from the others, confirmed a subtle but consistent change in the object's course. It wasn't large enough to call dramatic, just a delicate curve, like a whisper against the laws of motion. But for scientists who live and breathe precision, a whisper is enough to raise alarms. Usually, comets or asteroids can shift paths slightly when jets of gas burst from their surfaces, something called outgassing. But there was a problem. 3I Atlas didn't show any sign of it. No visible tail, no plume, no flicker that could explain the movement. In fact, its outer shell appeared eerily smooth and stable, as if sealed. It was behaving like something that wasn't supposed to exist. Researchers ran simulations to see if gravity from nearby planets might have influenced its path, but even that couldn't explain it. The deviation was too precise, too controlled. It was as if the object were making tiny corrections to stay on course, rather than drifting naturally. Some began whispering about the possibility of a hollow body, or even artificial propulsion. But those ideas were kept out of official reports. Nobody wanted to be the one to suggest something that would sound crazy on the evening news. As more nights passed, the data became undeniable. The object's path was moving in a slow arc, ever so slightly adjusting as if responding to something unseen. One researcher described it as a dance with nothing. The adjustments matched no known gravitational pattern. They weren't random, they had rhythm, the same way a ship at sea adjusts its sails, almost imperceptibly to stay on course against shifting winds. This interstellar traveler seemed to be doing the same, in the emptiness of space. The team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory began running deep space tracking models, combining radar data with visual imagery from telescopes across the globe. They found that every 12 hours, the object's motion included a faint pulse, a recurring change in velocity so small it took sophisticated analysis to even notice. That repeating rhythm hinted at something mechanical, or at least structured deep inside. But again, no one dared put that thought in a report. Meanwhile, the public fascination was growing. Videos titled "It's Moving on Its Own" and "3i Atlas is Steering Itself" exploded across YouTube. For every scientist begging for patience, there were 10 creators feeding speculation. And as usual, public imagination raced far ahead of scientific caution. But the scientists themselves weren't calm. At the European Southern Observatory, one astrophysicist compared the motion of 3i Atlas to a beacon, a point of light following a calculated path rather than a chaotic one. The velocity variations matched no natural model, and when plotted backward through time, those adjustments didn't come from randomness. They traced a purposeful line, one that aimed straight through the solar plane toward an area of the galaxy already known for strange energy readings. What made the situation even stranger was the stability of its spin. Most interstellar objects, shaped irregularly, tumble chaotically as they move, but this one rotated like a gyroscope, perfectly steady. The consistency of that spin didn't match its irregular surface reflections, creating a mystery within a mystery. Was it natural geometry, or was there something inside maintaining that balance? Some theorized it might be made of materials we haven't catalogued yet, metals or compounds capable of self-stabilizing through magnetic fields. Others wondered if it was a fragment of something larger that once existed, something ancient and far more advanced than we can imagine. Whatever the truth, one thing became clear. 3i Atlas was not behaving like a typical traveler. NASA issued a cautious statement noting unusual non-gravitational acceleration, a phrase that, while accurate, sounded deliberately understated. To the public, it was just another technical note. But to the scientists who wrote it, those 3 words carried weight. Non-gravitational acceleration means one thing: some force other than gravity is acting on it, and no one could say what. Weeks later, a new round of infrared scans confirmed what many suspected. Its surface temperature was far lower than expected, almost unnaturally cold for an object approaching the inner solar system. It should have warmed up, released gas, maybe developed a tail, but nothing. It stayed silent, dark, and chillingly stable. Some began to draw comparisons to the first interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, which had also shown strange acceleration without visible outgassing. But even then, Oumuamua's shape, size, and speed were different. This new object was bigger, slower, and far more deliberate. If Oumuamua was a skipping stone, 3i Atlas felt like a ship slowing down to look around. Theorists on forums began calling it the Drifter, suggesting it wasn't just passing by, but observing, moving slowly enough to study, fast enough to stay out of reach. The name stuck for a while, spreading through social media and science podcasts. But those who'd seen the real data avoided the term. They knew words shape perception, and perception could shape panic. Every time the object adjusted its course, even slightly, telescopes refocused. Every signal from deep space probes was rechecked. Every anomaly in solar radiation data was reconsidered. What if it wasn't moving randomly? What if it was following something, or someone, we couldn't yet detect? By this time, teams from multiple nations were watching, comparing notes privately, while their official statements stayed cautious and minimal. The data was public, but the interpretation was not, and though nobody would say it out loud, everyone involved in the tracking effort felt it. The object was not drifting aimlessly. The silence around it grew heavy. No light flares, no sudden bursts, no visible reaction to solar wind, nothing. It continued its steady, quiet motion, like a secret gliding through space. For something moving that fast, its calmness felt almost deliberate. It wasn't fighting the forces around it, it was flowing through them, the way a leaf rides a current. Guided, but not passive. In private, one senior astronomer said something that many quietly agreed with. "If it's just a rock, it's the smartest rock I've ever seen." And as the data continued to come in, that sense of unease deepened. Because if 3i Atlas wasn't just drifting, if those small adjustments were purposeful, then something, somewhere, was behind them. When scientists finally plotted 3i Atlas's full trajectory on a three-dimensional map, what they saw made no sense. The line wasn't the clean, predictable arc of a comet drawn in by gravity. It was a twisting, almost hesitant path, like something making a series of careful choices, rather than obeying the pull of the sun. The model looked alive, a thread weaving through space instead of a simple fall toward the center. At first they thought the data was wrong. Someone at the University of Arizona reran the calculations from scratch, cross-checking every observation. The results came back the same. The object's path entered the solar system at an angle so shallow it should have been deflected or slowed by Jupiter's gravity. Yet it passed the giant planet's influence as if guided by an unseen hand. It should have curved, but it didn't. Not quite. Instead, it slid through space, as though it already knew the route. A small team at Caltech decided to project its journey backward in time to see where it had come from. They used supercomputers to rewind the solar system's motion, adjusting for every gravitational field, every solar pulse, every known disturbance across millions of miles. After hours of running the simulation, a single glowing line appeared on their screen, the object's past path, and it led to a place that made the room go quiet. The trace pointed back to a region near the Perseus Arm, one of the outer spiral arms of our galaxy. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the exact coordinates it crossed. The same region where, years ago, astronomers had recorded one of the most powerful and unexplained radio bursts ever detected. The signal, brief but intense, had defied explanation. Some had written it off as a magnetar flare, others as an instrument glitch. But now, years later, this new object appeared to be coming from the very same area. It was hard not to wonder if there was a connection. Could 3i Atlas and that mysterious signal share a story? Could one have followed the other? The idea sounded wild, yet the math didn't lie. The object's trajectory traced straight through that cosmic neighborhood, as if launched from there long ago. Scientists began calculating how long it would have taken for something traveling at its speed to reach us. The answer shocked them. Hundreds of thousands of years. That meant whatever sent it, or whatever event created it, had happened long before human civilization even existed. It wasn't a recent visitor. It was an ancient traveler finally arriving. The motion models revealed another oddity. Instead of the random, open, hyperbolic path most interstellar objects take, 3i Atlas followed a curve that almost grazed the sun, then straightened again, like a slingshot maneuver. Space agencies use the same technique to accelerate probes using gravity assists. But comets don't plan trajectories. They don't choose to dive close to a star, adjust speed, and then aim outward again. That kind of precision belonged to engineers, not nature. Around this time, whispers started circulating through the research community. Some called it coincidence, others called it design. A few even speculated it could be debris from something larger. Perhaps an ancient probe or fragment from a long-lost civilization that once existed beyond our stellar neighborhood. But those were private conversations, late at night, between scientists who knew better than to make such claims publicly. When the orbital projections were extended into the future, the mystery deepened. Instead of exiting the solar system in a random direction, 3I Atlas appeared to be steering toward a very specific point, a stretch of space roughly aligned with Earth's orbital plane, not close enough to pose a collision risk, but close enough to be noticed. The object seemed to be choosing to pass through the inner system, where multiple planets could observe it clearly. NASA analysts double-checked. The math held up. If left untouched, the trajectory would bring the object within the observation range of several major probes. It was as if it wanted to be seen. That idea unsettled people more than they cared to admit. As news quietly reached the European Space Agency, they ran their own simulations using independent data sets. The same results appeared. Each curve, each subtle bend of its path, aligned with precision that couldn't be explained by random physics. The more they zoomed in, the more the path resembled a pre-planned route. One engineer compared it to a cosmic breadcrumb trail. Another simply said, "This thing has a flight plan." The moment the findings were shared, agencies started closing off portions of their internal reports to public view. Too many journalists were asking the same questions, and the agencies didn't have comfortable answers. The official explanation was that 3I Atlas was showing anomalous orbital behavior due to unknown outgassing dynamics. Privately, many scientists rolled their eyes. There was no gas, no dust, no visual sign of any such dynamics. It was the safest way to say we don't know what's happening. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers began posting their own orbital animations online. They traced the object's incoming path and noticed that, if extended far enough, it aligned almost perfectly with the trajectory of Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor detected years before. The similarity wasn't exact, but it was close enough to stir debate. Were these two objects fragments of the same event, or were they part of something larger? Perhaps a chain of interstellar debris following an invisible track across the galaxy. The pattern grew even stranger when researchers mapped the projected outbound route. After looping near the Sun, 3I Atlas wouldn't simply continue outward into deep space. Instead, it would arc toward another region containing several known exoplanet systems, worlds potentially capable of supporting life. That detail spread quickly among the more speculative corners of the internet. People began asking whether this object was on a survey route, visiting star systems the way a probe might follow waypoints. Inside mission planning rooms, tension built. Telescopes were rescheduled to track the object continuously. Radar facilities that usually monitored near-Earth asteroids were redirected. Every hour of observation time was suddenly precious. They wanted to catch every flicker, every angle, every possible data point. Because if this trajectory really wasn't natural, it meant something, or someone, had plotted it long ago. The public updates remained careful. Scientists spoke of curious anomalies and fascinating opportunities for study. But off the record, several admitted that the numbers simply didn't behave like anything they had modeled before. Space is vast, unpredictable, and filled with forces we barely understand. But not this kind of unpredictability. This was too clean, too intentional. One astrophysicist at MIT compared it to finding a perfect spiral seashell in a desert of random stones. It could happen naturally, yes, but the odds were so small you'd wonder if someone had placed it there just to be found. That was the feeling 3I Atlas gave, a sense that it wanted to be discovered, to be measured, to be watched. As it moved closer to the inner solar system, the trajectory tightened again, forming a subtle curve that mirrored the path of Earth's orbit at a distance. The precision was eerie. It wasn't approaching us directly, but tracing our pattern from afar, as though observing from a safe distance. Telescopes picked up no change in brightness, no rotation irregularities, no sudden acceleration, just that steady, silent glide. The same unbroken motion that had carried it across unimaginable distances for eons. When the trajectory plots were finally overlaid on the galactic map, one final detail emerged that no one could easily explain. The outbound path didn't just aim toward random space. It intersected, almost perfectly, with the same region from which another mysterious radio signal had been received just months earlier. The connection was impossible to ignore. Two unrelated anomalies, separated by time and space, now sharing a single line on a star map. In the control rooms, no one spoke for a long time. The lights from the monitors flickered across their faces as they stared at that glowing arc, a route that seemed to have a destination. And as more data streamed in from observatories around the world, it became harder to tell which was more unsettling: the possibility that the trajectory was random, or the possibility that it wasn't. The further researchers traced the path of 3I Atlas, the stranger it became. The object's trajectory pointed toward a part of the galaxy that astronomers rarely spoke about in public, a sector known only by its cold coordinates, buried deep within catalogues and technical logs. To most, it was an empty region, a stretch of cosmic silence between spiral arms where almost nothing of interest was supposed to exist. But those who studied it closely knew it had a name whispered among scientists: the Forbidden Region. At first glance, the area appeared completely normal. Stars dotted the darkness as they did everywhere else, though fewer and fainter than usual. Yet as telescopes gathered more data, odd inconsistencies began to emerge. Light from that region behaved strangely. It bent, scattered, and faded in ways that defied known physics. Radio signals seemed to vanish when passing through it, as if swallowed by something unseen. Even the cosmic microwave background, that faint afterglow of the Big Bang, appeared distorted, as if a shadow hung over that part of the sky. It was in this direction that 3I Atlas seemed to come from. When astronomers plotted its reverse course, the line cut straight through the edge of this dark zone before disappearing into the galactic void beyond. For months, researchers debated what it meant. Was it just coincidence, or had this mysterious visitor emerged from a region that modern instruments had barely begun to understand? To trace its journey, scientists relied on gravitational modeling. Every body in the galaxy, planets, stars, even clouds of gas, pulls on objects that pass nearby. By calculating these tugs backward in time, researchers can estimate where an interstellar traveler originated. But the numbers for 3I Atlas didn't add up cleanly. Instead of coming from a predictable path through known star systems, its route seemed to twist through invisible forces, as if guided or disrupted by something that wasn't there. This led to theories. Some believed the object had passed through a dense field of dark matter, bending its path in ways gravity alone couldn't explain. Others proposed something stranger, that the region itself acted like a lens, warping both light and motion. A few, more daring scientists wondered if there might be structures there, relics of long-lost civilizations, or phenomena we had no language for. Whatever the case, the data made one thing clear. 3I Atlas wasn't simply drifting. It was following a path written by something beyond our current understanding. The Forbidden Region had long been a subject of quiet fascination. Decades earlier, missions had tried to map it using radio telescopes and infrared surveys, but almost every attempt failed. Signals sent into the area returned with heavy interference, their strength dropping to near zero. Some data came back corrupted, filled with patterns that no one could decode. In one notable instance, a research team in the 1990s reported receiving repeating pulses from deep inside the region, pulses that mimicked the rhythm of a heartbeat. When they tried to observe it again, the signal was gone. The official explanation was equipment error, but those who were there never forgot. In recent years, as technology advanced, astronomers tried again. The James Webb Space Telescope peered into the edges of the region, capturing faint, ghostly glows that didn't match any known star catalogue. Some of the light appeared to flicker with regular intervals, like coded messages written across light years. But when they checked again days later, the signals vanished, replaced by total blackness. It was as if something inside the region didn't want to be seen. That's when 3i Atlas entered the picture, when data scientists traced its path and realized it aligned perfectly with the outer boundary of that same sector. Many dismissed it as coincidence. Yet, coincidence after coincidence began stacking up. Its speed, its brightness, even the spectral signature of the materials on its surface, everything seemed slightly off compared to natural interstellar objects. The ratio of metals, for instance, showed traces of isotopes rarely found in comets or asteroids. Some were the kinds produced only under extreme conditions, like near supernovae or within artificial reactors. Even stranger, the object's rotation rate fluctuated as it moved closer to the Sun. That shouldn't happen in a stable body. It was as if something, perhaps within it or behind it, was influencing its spin. Instruments detected faint electromagnetic emissions, pulsing in irregular intervals. The patterns were subtle but undeniable, like a whisper trying to reach across the void. As more telescopes focused on the region, new anomalies surfaced. Gravitational readings around 3i Atlas didn't match its visible mass. Something about it was heavier than it appeared, as though it was dragging an invisible field behind it. In the data visualizations, it looked almost like a tail, an unseen wake stretching back toward the forbidden region. Some began to wonder if 3i Atlas was not just an object, but a messenger. Maybe it had been ejected or released from that area for reasons we couldn't yet guess. What if the so-called forbidden region wasn't empty at all, but active in ways that defied ordinary physics? What if the distortions we'd seen for decades were not random, but the signature of something immense moving within? For years, governments and space agencies kept quiet about their findings. Internal memos surfaced hinting that multiple observatories had detected the same gravitational fluctuations, yet none dared publish official reports. When journalists asked NASA officials about the region, they dismissed it as data artifacts. But behind closed doors, analysts and engineers exchanged encrypted files labeled only with coordinates. The deeper researchers dug, the more patterns they found. The magnetic field readings of 3i Atlas seemed to sync with fluctuations recorded from that region years earlier. The timing matched perfectly, like a clock ticking in two places at once. If true, that meant some link, maybe energetic, maybe something else, still connected the object to the place it came from. But what could hold a connection across light years? Some proposed a quantum explanation, suggesting that whatever created 3i Atlas had embedded within it particles entangled with a source deep inside the forbidden region. Others whispered about something older, structures left behind by civilizations predating humanity, designed to send messages across space not with light, but with gravity itself. Whatever the truth, one detail unsettled even the most skeptical minds. The trajectory of 3i Atlas wasn't random. Its path across the solar system, when mapped over time, traced a slow, deliberate curve, one that pointed directly toward Earth. And if its origin lay in that silent, forbidden part of the galaxy, then perhaps it wasn't drifting toward us by chance. Perhaps it was always meant to arrive. When the first readings came in, nobody paid much attention. The numbers were small, buried deep in the ocean of data streaming from telescopes and sensors around the world. But one late night, a researcher at the European Southern Observatory noticed something strange. The readings weren't random. They seemed to pulse, not in a pattern that nature usually makes, but in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. At first he thought it was interference, maybe a satellite or a reflection from a nearby star. But when he filtered out the background noise, the pulse remained steady and quiet, repeating over and over from the same region of the sky. The location matched the coordinates where 3i Atlas was first detected. That made no sense. A comet doesn't send signals. A comet reflects light. It doesn't emit it. Yet, the data showed faint, radio-like bursts coming from its trajectory, timed so perfectly that it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. The scientist ran the data again, and again the signal appeared, hiding between longer intervals, as if waiting for someone patient enough to notice. He marked the anomaly, logged it, and sent it to a few colleagues with a short note, worth a second look. Within hours, it became the center of quiet attention among several observatories. As more teams looked, the pattern deepened. The pulse wasn't constant. It changed slightly depending on the object's distance from the sun. Some called it thermal interference. Others said it could be the result of charged particles reacting with magnetic fields. But deep down, a few wondered if they were witnessing something else, something that couldn't be explained by heat or dust or light, because when they mapped the signal over time, it formed a sequence that looked almost like a code. Not a human code, but a structured one, with order, repetition, and intentional gaps. Weeks passed before the story reached the public. By then, the data had already been reviewed, denied, and quietly archived. The official word was simple: no significant anomalies detected. But behind the scenes, the signal refused to disappear. Every time the comet reappeared in the sky, the same pattern came back with it. A whisper buried in cosmic noise, repeating across millions of miles, like an echo from something far older than our solar system. A small group of researchers decided to dig deeper. They compared the data with known radio bursts from pulsars, quasars, and distant magnetars. Nothing matched. The energy was too low, too focused. When they applied time-stretching algorithms, the rhythm slowed into something almost audible. A sequence of tones, rising and falling like the breath of a machine. It wasn't a voice, not really, but it carried the same eerie sense of intent. Some described it as mechanical, others as organic. It was both familiar and alien, simple and complex, a message that refused to reveal itself. NASA's Deep Space Network quietly ran parallel scans. The results confirmed what others had whispered. The signal was real, consistent, and synchronized with 3I Atlas's path. But the official channels avoided any public comment. In internal emails, researchers debated whether to classify the data as interference or to investigate it further. Some feared it could reignite the alien probe theories that had followed previous interstellar visitors. The last thing anyone wanted was another media storm about extraterrestrial contact. Yet the numbers didn't lie. The signal was there. As months went by, the trail of data grew longer. Hidden inside it, faint harmonics appeared, additional frequencies that hinted at depth, as if the signal was layered. It wasn't just one tone, but many, folding over each other like chords. Some scientists compared it to early attempts at digital compression, information packed into simple pulses. The possibility was unsettling. If it was just natural, why did it behave as if it carried structure? Why did it follow the object's orbit so perfectly, adapting to its motion through the solar wind? Late one night, a research assistant decided to visualize the signal differently. Instead of plotting it as frequency over time, he mapped it as light, each pulse represented as a point in space. When he rendered the image, something unexpected appeared. The pattern wasn't random at all. It spiraled, like a fingerprint or a whirlpool, its lines wrapping inward toward a center that didn't exist. It looked like a path, a map of something moving, not through space, but through dimensions we couldn't see. He stared at it for hours, wondering if what he'd drawn was a coincidence, or if the object itself was trying to say something. The visualization spread quietly among the team. No one wanted to publish it, but everyone kept a copy. Some saw it as a symbol, others as data. But a few older scientists noticed something chilling. The spiral resembled ancient carvings found in petroglyphs around the world. Symbols often linked to the stars, the sun, and the idea of returning visitors. No one dared to make that connection official, but the resemblance haunted those who saw it. Had humanity seen this pattern before? Was it buried in our oldest myths, waiting for this moment to reappear? Outside the research circles, the story began leaking in small fragments. Amateur astronomers picked up whispers of radio ghosts following 3I Atlas. Online communities speculated wildly. Secret probes, alien artifacts, messages from another civilization. Most dismissed it as conspiracy, but somewhere between science and speculation, the truth hovered, fragile and unspoken. Because those closest to the data knew something they couldn't easily explain. Every time the signal repeated, its timing shifted ever so slightly, matching the Earth's orbital movement, as if whatever was behind it was watching us too. Even after countless checks and recalibrations, the readings remained the same. No instrument error, no transmission interference, just a quiet pulse, echoing from a comet that shouldn't be able to send one. The pattern had no clear start or end. It simply existed, flowing endlessly like a breath. The more they studied it, the more it felt alive. One researcher described it best. "It's not what it's saying that scares me, it's that it knows when we're listening." The scientists gathered in the dimly lit observation room, the air heavy with a silence that carried more weight than words ever could. Screens glowed faintly against the darkness, showing the same object, 3I Atlas, drifting through the void like a thought that refused to leave the mind. They had been tracking it for months, each new set of data only deepening the mystery instead of solving it. What was supposed to be a routine analysis had turned into a quiet obsession, and now they faced a problem far greater than they could fully grasp. Something about its motion, its light curve, its energy readings, none of it made sense. And yet, there it was, undeniable and unexplainable. At first, most dismissed the oddities as data errors. One senior astronomer even joked that maybe the telescope had finally grown tired. But as more instruments confirmed the same readings, the jokes faded, and the room grew colder. They compared notes, shared models, rechecked every calculation, and still the numbers held. The object wasn't behaving like a comet, an asteroid, or anything catalogued before. It emitted bursts of gas toward the sun, not away from it, defying the known physics of how heat interacts with frozen material. One young researcher whispered what everyone else was afraid to say, that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't natural at all. When they traced the path backward, hoping to find comfort in predictability, that comfort never came. The line led to a region of space long, marked by silence, a zone astronomers often referred to with uneasy humor as the void that watches. Back! It was where strange radio signatures had once been detected decades earlier, signals that stopped as suddenly as they began. Most had written those off as cosmic background noise, but now the coordinates lined up perfectly. For the first time, the coincidence didn't feel like one. The head of the project, Dr. Mason, had spent 40 years in astronomy. He believed in patterns, logic, and the comfort of mathematics. But when the new data came in, even he paused longer than usual before speaking. He ran his hand over the console and stared at the graphs as though they were alive. The younger researchers watched him, waiting for reassurance that this was still science, not something else. But all he could say was, "Run it again." They did. The result didn't change. Soon, quiet discussions turned into private meetings. Some wanted to alert NASA. Others thought they should keep the data internal until they were sure what they were seeing. Then came the email, short, official, and cold. The higher-ups were aware of the findings. For now, all communications about 3I Atlas would be restricted to internal review. No public disclosure without clearance. A wall had been built overnight, and the scientists found themselves on the wrong side of it. Still, work continued. Every night, as the world slept, they watched the faint glimmer of Atlas move through the dark. It wasn't just its trajectory that bothered them anymore. It was the feeling that the object seemed aware, adjusting in subtle ways that mirrored observation. Point a new telescope, and a few days later, its reflectivity changed. Increase focus, and the object would dim. They told themselves it was coincidence, but the thought kept returning, echoing quietly through the lab. What if it knows? In the following weeks, data began disappearing from the shared database. Files they had uploaded the night before would vanish by morning. Some blamed server errors. Others suspected something less innocent. Dr. Mason stopped using email entirely, switching to handwritten notes and private briefings. The younger staff joked nervously about the Watchers, but their laughs felt thin and forced. Everyone knew something was off, and yet nobody could stop. Curiosity had become compulsion. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the team gathered for what would become their most intense session yet. They had received new infrared images from an observatory in Chile, images that showed Three-Eye Atlas glowing faintly, almost rhythmically. Dr. Mason enlarged the frame, adjusted the brightness, and everyone leaned closer. The glow wasn't random. It pulsed in intervals, 3 short, 1 long, 2 short again. Someone whispered, "That's not natural timing." The room went silent. It wasn't proof of intelligence, but it wasn't easy to dismiss either. The following morning, 2 of the junior researchers found their access badges deactivated. Their credentials no longer worked. Their files were locked, and they were told to take some time off. The rest of the team understood what that meant. Whatever this was, it had become political. The truth wasn't just scientific anymore. It was classified. They had wandered too close to something powerful, and now invisible hands were pulling the strings. In the weeks that followed, the team fractured. Some resigned, unwilling to live under the weight of secrets. Others stayed, unable to let go of the mystery. Dr. Mason became quieter, speaking mostly in fragments and half-thoughts. He started keeping a small notebook, scribbling patterns, coordinates, and questions that he never shared aloud. The notebook was always with him, even when he left the lab. When one of the interns asked what he was writing, he smiled faintly and said, "I am just trying to see the shape of the silence." Then one night, just before dawn, a data feed went live from a deep space array that wasn't supposed to be monitoring Atlas anymore. The system had automatically flagged an anomaly. The object had changed direction, slightly but deliberately. Not because of gravity, not because of solar wind. It was as if it had chosen to move. The team watched the numbers update in real time, hearts pounding. Dr. Mason didn't speak. He simply stood, adjusted his glasses, and whispered, "It's responding." When they sent the update to Central Command, there was no reply. Hours passed, then days. The silence from above was complete. The researchers continued monitoring, but every time they tried to share new data, the network froze. It was as though the system itself was rejecting the truth. Dr. Mason began recording his findings on analog tape, keeping them hidden. "Digital can disappear," he said, "but tape is harder to erase." By now, they weren't sure who to trust. Was it the agencies, the networks, or something else entirely? The more they uncovered, the less sense it made. And still, Atlas moved. Steady, deliberate, almost graceful, as if following a path laid out long before humans ever looked to the stars. The scientists weren't just chasing data anymore. They were chasing meaning, trying to understand if what they were witnessing was the beginning of something, or a warning. The deeper they went, the more questions surfaced. Why had observatories gone silent? Why had space agencies stopped updating their public feeds? Why were private telescopes suddenly experiencing technical maintenance at the same time? Each answer led to another wall, another locked door, and behind each door, the same uneasy truth waited. Someone, somewhere, already knew more than they did. As days turned into nights and nights back into days, the scientists began to sense a quiet pressure, like being watched by the very thing they were studying. They weren't paranoid, not entirely. Data packets were intercepted mid-transfer, private messages were altered, and Dr. Mason's notebook disappeared one morning from his desk. When he asked security for footage, the cameras showed nothing, just static. That was the moment he finally admitted, out loud, that something larger than science was at play. And yet, even with the fear growing heavier, not one of them stopped looking at the sky. Because for all the silence and secrecy, for all the unanswered questions and the things they weren't supposed to see, one truth remained. 3i. Atlas was still out there, moving through the dark, leaving a trail of questions too big to ignore and perhaps too dangerous to answer. You said, for weeks the scientists waited for updates that never came. Normally, when something of cosmic importance appears in the sky, the world's space agencies move fast. NASA, the European Space Agency, and China's CNSA usually release data, issue statements, or share new images to keep the public informed. But this time, nothing. The official channels went silent. No press conferences, no telescope updates, not even a quiet acknowledgement that 3i Atlas was still being observed. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on transparency. At first, the silence felt procedural. Maybe they were verifying new data or waiting to coordinate with international observatories. But as days turned into weeks, even the most patient researchers started to feel uneasy. Amateur astronomers around the world noticed the same thing. The object's position was changing in ways that didn't match the last publicly released trajectory. It wasn't where it was supposed to be. And yet, the agencies that should have been tracking it the closest had gone completely dark. Within the astronomy community, quiet conversations began. Private messages between observatories, encrypted calls between universities, whispers during conferences, all asking the same question. Why had everyone stopped talking about Atlas? Some speculated the data had been classified. Others believed the silence meant there was nothing new to report. But there were a few, the ones who'd been watching Atlas night after night through their own telescopes, who knew that wasn't true. Something was happening out there, something the public wasn't supposed to know. A handful of independent researchers decided to dig deeper. They compared open-source telescope logs from multiple continents. Some noticed faint anomalies in the object's light pattern, slight flickers that didn't fit the usual signature of a comet or asteroid. Others saw that radio observatories had abruptly pulled certain frequency bands offline, citing technical recalibration. The timing was too neat to be coincidence. Every data silence seemed to line up perfectly with Atlas's closest approaches to major observation points. Meanwhile, online forums and scientific networks started filling with speculation. Some thought Atlas might be emitting energy bursts that interfered with instruments. Others whispered that what we were seeing wasn't an ordinary interstellar visitor, but something else. Perhaps a probe, or worse, a fragment of something artificial. Of course, those claims were quickly buried under skepticism. But even the skeptics had to admit that the level of global silence was strange. NASA's last official update mentioned nothing unusual, but the tone felt off. A single paragraph buried in a report stated that data collection on 3i Atlas has been temporarily deferred pending further analysis. Deferred. That one word rippled through the community. Scientists don't defer data collection on active objects moving through the solar system. They observe until the very end. Deferring meant something had changed. Either the object was no longer safe to monitor, or what they were seeing couldn't be easily explained. When people started reaching out to contacts inside these agencies, the responses became even more unusual. Normally open scientists suddenly grew cautious. Some stopped replying altogether. A few said they'd been instructed not to discuss Atlas outside official channels. One even hinted that images captured by the James Webb Telescope were not for public release. That phrase, not for public release, sent chills down the spines of those who understood what it meant. It wasn't science anymore. It was security. Around this time, one researcher based in Chile claimed to have captured faint, delayed radio signals in the same direction as Atlas. The pattern didn't match cosmic background noise. It was rhythmic, pulsing, repeating every few minutes with slight variations, as if it carried structured information. When she tried to share her findings, her online posts were removed within hours. Her university cited data integrity concerns. Not long after, her telescope time was revoked. That was when people realized the silence wasn't just absence, it was suppression. Someone, somewhere, didn't want this story growing beyond a handful of late-night discussions and small research circles. It was the kind of silence that comes not from ignorance, but from deliberate control. Governments had gone quiet before. During strange satellite incidents, deep space probes gone missing, or classified discoveries near Mars. But never like this. Never with this level of coordination. Across social media, viewers began piecing together scraps of public footage, trying to track Atlas themselves. Videos popped up showing faint, moving dots in the sky, often with captions like, "Possible Atlas sighting." Most were dismissed as lens flares or debris, but every few nights one clip would seem too consistent to ignore. And every time one went viral, it vanished, deleted, flagged, or buried by algorithmic waves of unrelated content. Some began to wonder whether the silence itself was a form of communication. Was there something so profound, or so dangerous, that the world's major powers had quietly agreed to keep it out of public sight? The idea sounds like fiction, and yet history is full of similar patterns. Whenever humanity has encountered something that challenged its understanding of the cosmos, the first response has always been fear. And fear breeds secrecy. In quiet offices across NASA, ESA, and China's space program, scientists faced their own versions of the same impossible choice. Speak up and risk chaos, or stay silent and hope the truth wouldn't be too late. Some believed the object posed no threat at all, that the mystery was simply the result of human error and overinterpretation. But others weren't so sure. They'd seen the data, the shifting light, the faint radio anomalies. Something about Atlas didn't fit the natural order, and so the world kept watching the sky, unaware that behind closed doors, the greatest minds on Earth were divided. Not on what Atlas was doing, but on whether humanity was ready to know what it truly was. For a long time, people assumed 3i Atlas was moving through space at random. Just another interstellar traveler passing through our solar system by chance. But as astronomers began to map its path with more precision, something strange began to emerge. The object's route wasn't chaotic at all. In fact, it followed a very precise curve, one that seemed to align almost perfectly with specific regions of gravitational influence, as if it were navigating, not drifting. It started when a group of independent researchers noticed that Atlas's closest approaches to certain planets seemed to fall into a repeating ratio. Every time it neared one celestial body, the timing and angle mirrored a previous encounter almost exactly, only shifted slightly forward in space. It was a rhythm, a beat in the background of the cosmos, too consistent to be mere coincidence. One astronomer described it as a pattern that feels planned. At first, the discovery was dismissed as wishful thinking, the human mind searching for meaning in randomness. But as more data came in from amateur observatories and deep space trackers, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Each time Atlas passed through a key gravitational zone, it adjusted its orientation, as if responding to something. Maybe a pull, maybe a signal. Whatever the case, it was not behaving like a normal comet. Scientists plotted these movements on digital maps of the solar system, marking every shift, every small turn. When the points were connected, they revealed a geometric pattern, not perfectly symmetrical, but deliberate enough to suggest design. The object appeared to be weaving a path that traced between planets and moons with uncanny precision. Some said it looked like a spiral converging toward the inner solar system. Others saw something even more eerie, a set of intersecting lines that, when overlaid on a galactic chart, pointed straight back to a region of space with a history of unexplained radio signals. That region had already been infamous among astronomers. Decades ago, it was the source of a strange, one-time pulse that didn't match any known cosmic phenomenon. It became known simply as the signal. No one could ever replicate it or explain its origin. And now, years later, 3i Atlas seemed to have come from that same direction, moving along a trajectory that hinted at purpose. People began asking whether Atlas might not be just passing through, but retracing a route. A path followed before, perhaps long ago. Could it have been here once, unnoticed? In an age when we had no telescopes to see it? Some theorized it was following the same gravitational lanes used by other interstellar objects, like Oumuamua, though with far greater precision. Others thought the path was too perfect, too intelligent. It was as if someone had charted this course ages ago, setting Atlas in motion with instructions built into its very structure. The idea unsettled many researchers. Space, after all, is supposed to be indifferent, vast, cold, and random. But Atlas wasn't behaving randomly. Even its small shifts in velocity seemed too smooth, too measured, like a craft adjusting its course rather than a rock being tossed by solar winds. When data analysts ran the numbers backward, tracing the object's likely origin, all signs pointed back to that same strange corner of the galaxy. The odds of that being chance were 1 in millions. As word spread through private channels, tension began to build. Governments knew the story would spread eventually, and they also knew that the public wasn't ready to hear the phrase, possible artificial trajectory. The official explanation continued to insist Atlas was a naturally occurring comet, but even within NASA, quiet internal memos admitted non-natural motion patterns cannot be ruled out. Meanwhile, small observatories in Europe, South America, and Australia kept tracking. They found something even more disturbing. When Atlas passed near Mars, its tail didn't behave like a typical cometary tail at all. Instead of streaming directly away from the sun, it curved, bending slightly toward the inner system. Some suggested magnetic interference, others proposed unusual material composition. But the curvature matched exactly where the object's next major trajectory point would take it, straight past Earth's orbit. By now, the pattern had taken on a life of its own. Mathematicians and data scientists began feeding Atlas's movement into predictive models, treating it like a coded signal rather than a random orbit. What they found deepened the mystery even further. Each positional adjustment, when translated into binary intervals, formed repeating sequences, numbers that mirrored the Fibonacci ratio. Nature loves the Fibonacci pattern. It appears in shells, hurricanes, galaxies. But for a tumbling space object to mimic it with this precision, that was unheard of. People started wondering, was this the universe's natural mathematics at work, or something, or someone, using those same principles intentionally? The silence from the agencies made it worse. They neither confirmed nor denied. The only thing that leaked was a short statement from an anonymous engineer who claimed the object's radar signature showed surface variations inconsistent with ice or rock. He described it as layered, like metal sheets or dense composites. No one could verify that claim, but it spread fast. If true, it would mean Atlas wasn't just reflecting light, it was built. Late one night, a small team of independent astronomers plotted Atlas's past and future path together on one timeline. When they extended the pattern far enough, something astonishing appeared. The predicted future trajectory intersected not just Earth's orbit, but Earth's axis alignment, specifically at a time when our planet would be tilted at a particular angle toward that same region of the galaxy from which Atlas had come. It was almost poetic, like a cosmic rendezvous pre-written into the math of the stars. None of this was proof of anything. It was still just data, patterns, numbers, alignments, but the more people studied it, the harder it became to shake the feeling that Atlas was doing something deliberate. Maybe it wasn't an object at all, but a messenger, or a fragment of something larger still on its way. And as each night passed, and as more eyes turned upward, the pattern continued to hold, steady, predictable, as if following a script older than human memory itself. Just when scientists thought they had seen everything 3i Atlas could do, something completely unexpected happened. Late one night, a deep space monitoring station in New Mexico picked up a faint pulse of energy. A flash so quick, it almost went unnoticed. The signal came from the same coordinates as Atlas, right as it passed through a patch of space near Mars. At first, the team thought it was interference from a satellite or a reflection from the planet's thin atmosphere. But the timing didn't fit. The energy burst came in a pattern, 2 short pulses, then 1 long, and repeated exactly 6 minutes later. It was weak, but structured, and that's what made it strange. Natural radiation doesn't repeat itself in such an ordered way. Every flare, every cosmic ray is chaotic by nature. This wasn't. It was like listening to static and suddenly hearing a rhythm, not music, but intention. When they ran the data through signal filters, more structure emerged. Beneath the noise, faint harmonics hinted that the signal wasn't just a burst of energy. It was modulated, shaped by something intelligent or mechanical. The data was quickly flagged and encrypted. Within hours, the observatory's feed went offline for maintenance. No one from the public could access the raw readings again. But by then, a few independent researchers had already downloaded copies. When they compared it to archived cosmic radio bursts, they found something chilling. The pulse sequence matched a fragment of that same mysterious wow signal recorded decades ago from the same galactic region Atlas had come from. It wasn't identical, but it was close enough to suggest a connection. That discovery sent shockwaves through the small online community of astronomers and data sleuths who had been tracking Atlas since its discovery. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a strange orbit or an odd shape. It was about communication. But communication with what? A few tried to decode the pulse intervals like Morse code, converting the pattern into binary and even simple tones. What they found wasn't a message in any human sense, but rather a repeating ratio, one that reflected the same mathematical constant found in Atlas's movement. The Fibonacci sequence, once again. It was as if the signal and the object were speaking the same language of nature itself. NASA, ESA, and China's CNSA all went silent. None of them acknowledged the signal, even after rumors began circulating among observatories and university labs. Yet curiously, the following week, NASA issued an unscheduled data blackout across several deep space radar networks, citing temporary recalibration. That blackout lasted 3 full days, the exact period during which Atlas made its closest pass near Mars. When the systems came back online, no further mention of the energy pulse was made. It was as though the event had never happened. But silence only makes people listen harder. Amateur astronomers began using backyard radio telescopes, hoping to catch the same signal again. Most found nothing, except for one observer in northern Arizona, who reported a faint but similar pulse at a slightly different frequency as Atlas crossed behind the sun's glare. Once again, the pattern was identical. 2 short bursts, 1 long. Some called it coincidence. Others said it was too perfect to be random. Theories began to spread fast. Some believed it was a form of natural resonance, perhaps the comet's metallic or crystalline structure interacting with the solar wind. Others proposed something far stranger, that Atlas wasn't a comet at all, but a transmitter, an ancient probe powered by residual energy, waking up as it neared certain gravitational thresholds. Inside classified science briefings, whispers grew louder. Energy readings from Atlas didn't match known comet profiles. Typical comets release light and heat in specific wavelengths due to sublimating ice. Atlas's spectrum showed something different, a narrowband spike at 1420 MHz, the exact frequency often used in radio astronomy as a cosmic calling card, because it's tied to the hydrogen line, the most abundant element in the universe. For decades, scientists have said that any intelligent civilization trying to communicate might use that frequency. Now, something out there, something that looked like a comet, was doing just that. Across online forums and science circles, speculation turned to awe. What if 3i Atlas was responding to something? What if the pulse wasn't a broadcast, but a reply? A return signal to a call sent long ago, maybe even from Earth itself. Some historians pointed out that our earliest high-power radio transmissions, the kind that could travel across light years, were sent nearly a century ago. Roughly the same amount of time it would take for those signals to reach that distant region of space, where Atlas began its journey. Could it be possible that something heard us and sent this back? Skeptics were quick to push back, reminding everyone that extraordinary claims need extraordinary proof. Maybe the object's motion and energy pattern were simply misunderstood. Maybe the pulse was a trick of overlapping radio interference from human-made satellites. But the data didn't fit that theory neatly either. The directionality, timing, and frequency all pointed squarely toward Atlas's location. It was either an incredible coincidence or something far beyond coincidence. Behind the scenes, several observatories quietly shifted their telescopes back toward Atlas, using higher resolution sensors to capture any flicker of light or movement. Some even detected small flashes along its surface, not constant but irregular, like a machine blinking in the dark, almost alive. Every new piece of data only deepened the mystery. It wasn't behaving like a comet, it wasn't moving like one, and now it wasn't sounding like one either. For the first time, scientists began to whisper the question no one wanted to say aloud. Was someone trying to talk to us? Not long after the strange energy pulse was detected, something unusual began happening behind closed doors at NASA. Scheduled press briefings were quietly cancelled. Updates on the Atlas mission vanished from public calendars. The official social media accounts that once posted regular images of comets and asteroids went still. For those paying attention, it felt as if someone had flipped a switch, as though the conversation about Atlas had been deliberately erased. Inside the agency, the mood had shifted. Engineers and astronomers, who once spoke freely about data, suddenly avoided reporters' calls. Emails that had been quick to confirm findings now returned only with the same brief message. No comment at this time. Even the live streams from telescopes that normally showed harmless space activity went offline for technical upgrades. It was quiet. Too quiet. Independent researchers who had been tracking the object noticed something even more suspicious. Several of NASA's open data servers that hosted deep space readings were locked with password protection for the first time in years. The official reason given was system security maintenance. But the timing matched exactly with the days following the energy signal's detection. To those who knew the system, this was no ordinary update. Some scientists off the record began whispering that they were instructed not to discuss the Atlas project publicly until further internal review. The directive wasn't public, but it spread quietly through the research community. A few brave voices on science forums hinted that something significant was being withheld, something that went far beyond what a typical comet study might uncover. Others simply fell silent, unwilling to risk their careers by asking too many questions. The silence was strange for another reason too. NASA had never been shy about mysteries before. Unknown phenomena were opportunities for public engagement, for curiosity, for education. But this time, curiosity was being replaced by control. Even partner organizations like the European Space Agency and Japan's JAXA began aligning their statements, all using nearly identical phrasing when referring to Atlas: ongoing analysis, pending confirmation. It was like everyone was reading from the same script. When reporters began to dig deeper, they found that certain internal Atlas reports were labeled as sensitive compartmented information. That's a level of classification normally reserved for national security, not for comets. One journalist who had been covering deep space programs for years said it was the first time she had ever seen a civilian science mission receive that kind of restriction. The question became unavoidable. What was NASA protecting, and why? Around the same time, amateur astronomers started noticing strange behavior. From the satellites tasked with monitoring Atlas, Several high-resolution observation satellites that usually moved predictably were repositioned, all pointing toward the same narrow corridor of space where Atlas was moving. One night, an observer in Chile captured a faint streak of light crossing near the comet's path, not from Atlas itself, but from something else traveling alongside it. That video, posted online, was quickly taken down for copyright violation. Even though the uploader owned the footage, it only deepened the suspicion. Meanwhile, in quiet corners of the internet, discussions began to bloom. Astrophotographers shared screenshots comparing past Atlas images with new ones, and the difference was striking. The newer frames seemed subtly edited, with brightness levels adjusted and some star fields missing. It was as if the agency didn't want anyone outside to know what was really visible in those images. People speculated that NASA was working with defense agencies to study whether Atlas posed a threat, not because it was on a collision course, but because of what it represented. If it wasn't a comet, and if it truly was transmitting signals, then it might not be a natural object at all. Inside the agency, a few individuals tried to push for transparency. One anonymous scientist leaked fragments of internal memos suggesting that certain spectral readings from Atlas had been classified due to unexplained periodic energy spikes. Another mentioned that there was talk of redirecting deep space probes to collect further data, but the proposal was shut down almost immediately. The reason given: insufficient justification. It didn't make sense. If this object held clues to something unprecedented, why not investigate further, unless they already knew more than they were willing to share? Then came the strangest development of all. The Atlas tracking page on NASA's official database was updated one final time, not with new data, but with a removal notice. It simply read, "Object no longer in observation range." That was impossible. Atlas was still well within detectable distance, visible even to amateur telescopes. The statement didn't match reality. It was as if NASA had chosen to look away. Outside of official channels, whispers began to grow louder that this wasn't about science anymore. It was about control of information. The agency's silence only fueled the public's imagination. Some believed NASA had discovered proof of artificial origin. Others thought the energy pulse might have interfered with satellites or communication systems in ways that couldn't be explained. A few went further, suggesting that the blackout was coordinated at the international level, with multiple space agencies agreeing to suppress what they had found until they could understand it. Through it all, the world outside went on as usual. News cycles focused on politics, weather, and celebrity stories. But in small, late-night online communities, the ones where people still looked up at the sky with wonder, there was a different conversation happening. A quiet realization was spreading. Something had changed. Something was out there, behaving in ways that science couldn't yet explain. And for the first time in decades, NASA wasn't talking about it. They were hiding it. It wasn't fear that silenced them. It was uncertainty. Because what if Atlas wasn't just passing through our solar system by chance? What if it had come this way on purpose? When the silence from NASA stretched on longer than anyone expected, curiosity turned into tension. People wanted answers. Then late one night, something happened that changed everything. A file appeared on an obscure space-watching forum under the username Orbital Witness. The post was brief, written almost like a warning. It said, "Before this disappears, you should see what they're not telling you about 3i Atlas." Attached was a small encrypted data packet, no larger than a few megabytes. Within hours, thousands of people had downloaded it, even though no one knew exactly what it contained. At first, the file seemed useless. It was locked with a long password string that didn't match any obvious code. But within a few hours, a group of independent data analysts cracked it. What they found inside was astonishing. A collection of raw telemetry data, internal communications, and a fragment of an audio transmission that appeared to be captured by a deep space listening array. The headers on the files matched NASA's internal formatting style, suggesting this wasn't a fake. Whoever leaked it knew exactly where to look. The first thing people noticed was that the data tracked 3I Atlas far beyond the point where NASA had claimed it was out of range. The object hadn't disappeared. It had changed course. Instead of continuing on the straight path expected of an interstellar traveler, Atlas had adjusted, subtly but undeniably, toward the inner solar system. To ordinary people, that shift might have seemed small, but to astronomers it meant one thing: propulsion. Natural bodies don't correct their own trajectory. The second discovery was stranger still. Among the files was a sequence labeled Spectral Echo Log 5. It contained readings of radio frequencies, captured in bursts every 13 hours. When the analysts graphed the data, they noticed a repeating pattern. Not random static, not the kind of interference normally seen from background radiation. The signal followed a rhythmic pulse that repeated in intervals too precise to be natural. Some believed it resembled a digital handshake, the kind used in communication protocols. Then came the audio clip. It lasted only 27 seconds, filled mostly with background hum and distant cosmic noise. But halfway through, a faint oscillating tone rose from the static. It climbed and fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm, repeating exactly 3 times before fading out. Audio engineers ran it through filters and frequency analyzers. The structure was too organized to be coincidence. It was the kind of pattern that suggested intent, or at least design. Within hours, the leak spread everywhere. News sites picked it up, YouTubers broke it down frame by frame, and independent scientists tried to verify its authenticity. Some called it the biggest astronomical revelation since the WOW signal of 1977. Others dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, but the fact that the data matched NASA's encryption and formatting made it hard to ignore. There was something real buried in there. Behind the scenes, the reaction was chaotic. The forum where the file first appeared was taken offline within a day. The moderators said it was due to security issues, but users knew better. The post vanished completely, as if it had never existed. People who had re-uploaded the data to social media reported their accounts being locked or flagged for suspicious activity. The harder the information was suppressed, the more people wanted to see it. Meanwhile, a few journalists began reaching out to their contacts at NASA. Most received no response, but one reporter from Seattle managed to get through to a mid-level engineer who agreed to speak under strict anonymity. In a recorded call later leaked to the public, the engineer confirmed that the data was consistent with internal findings. When asked whether the object had changed direction, the engineer paused for a long moment before saying quietly, "Let's just say it's not behaving the way we expected." The admission set off a firestorm. Suddenly, the question wasn't just about what Atlas was, it was about who was trying to hide it. Some people speculated that the object wasn't alien at all, but part of a secret military project disguised as a natural discovery. Others believed it was genuinely extraterrestrial, maybe a probe, maybe a relic drifting between stars, now responding to something in our solar system. But the most unsettling theory came from a small group of astrophysicists who analyzed the signal timing in the leaked data. They noticed that the 13-hour pulse seemed to correspond not with Atlas's rotation, but with its distance from a particular star, not our sun, but a point in the direction of the constellation, Lyra. Every time Atlas passed a certain alignment with that star, the signal intensified. It was as if it were listening or responding. When those findings went public, NASA finally broke its silence. Sort of. They released a short statement calling the leaked data unauthorized and potentially altered. They warned the public against drawing conclusions based on unverified materials, but their denial raised more questions than it answered. If the data was fake, why did it match NASA's own encryption protocols? Why were their servers suddenly running maintenance at the same time the leak appeared? In the days that followed, more pieces of information slipped out. A whistleblower claiming to work at a deep space tracking facility in Australia said that Atlas's reflectivity had changed, as if parts of its surface were opening or moving. Another researcher shared a blurred image showing faint geometric patterns around the object, shapes that didn't belong on any known comet. None of these sources could be fully verified, but together they painted a chilling picture. Atlas wasn't a rock drifting through space. It was something else, something built. The debate reached television news. Scientists argued with former NASA employees, skeptics clashed with believers, and the story took on a life of its own. Through all the noise, one fact remained. The trajectory change was real, and no one could explain it. Even if the rest of the leak was fake, that one detail could not be ignored. Atlas had moved. On purpose. By the end of the week, the anonymous user who had posted the leak reappeared briefly under a new name. This time, their message was even shorter. It's not the first one. Before anyone could ask what that meant, the account was deleted. Some users claimed the IP traced back to a university network connected to a government research contract. Others believed it was a decoy, meant to distract from the truth. But the implication was clear. If Atlas wasn't alone, then we might not be dealing with a single object, but a pattern. And somewhere in the vast silence of space, the faint signal continued to pulse every 13 hours, steady and deliberate, like the heartbeat of something waiting to be found. After the leak spread and the mysterious 27-second audio clip became public, a quiet but determined group of independent researchers decided to dig deeper. They weren't content with speculation or internet rumors. Many of them had backgrounds in astrophysics, computer science, and signal analysis. Working out of basements, university labs, and makeshift home studios, they started calling themselves the Echo Group. None of them were paid, and most preferred to stay anonymous. But their mission was clear: to find out what that signal really meant. The first thing they did was clean the audio. Using advanced denoising software, they stripped away the cosmic background hum, layer by layer, until only the central tone remained. What they heard wasn't just static shaped by chance. The tone fluctuated in pitch and amplitude with such precision that even professional sound engineers admitted it seemed deliberate. Every pulse lasted exactly 2.4 seconds, followed by a 1.6-second silence, then a repeating rise and fall like an electronic breath. It was simple, structured, and unsettlingly calm. At first, they assumed it might be interference from an Earth-based satellite or military radar. But when they compared timestamps, the pattern didn't line up with any known source. The signal originated from deep space, coming directly from the coordinates where 3i Atlas had last been tracked. That alone made it extraordinary. Still, the group needed proof. They reached out to observatories around the world, asking for archived deep space recordings from the same nights. 3 observatories responded. Each one, independently, had captured the same signal, at the same intervals, coming from the same direction. With that confirmation, the Echo Group began decoding. They started by translating the fluctuations into numbers, turning each rise and fall into binary. 1s for high peaks, 0s for low. The result wasn't random. Every sequence ended in repeating clusters that seemed to form patterns, almost like punctuation marks. One researcher noticed that those clusters repeated every 39 pulses, the same number of degrees separating 3i Atlas's current trajectory from the galactic center. It could have been coincidence. But as one member of the group said during a live stream, coincidences don't repeat themselves with mathematical precision. They next ran the data through a Fourier transform to analyze its frequency layers. Beneath the main signal, hidden in what seemed like empty static, they found faint echoes, secondary tones delayed by milliseconds. When graphed, those tones formed symmetrical shapes resembling coordinates or star maps. Several astronomers identified one of the repeating shapes as matching the outline of a nebula located near the Hercules constellation, the same region where Earlier data suggested Atlas had originated news of the discovery leaked again, this time on a science blog that specialized in fringe research. The story exploded. Overnight, the group went from obscure hobbyists to the center of global attention. Interviews followed, documentaries speculated, and people began to ask a chilling question. What if the signal wasn't just a message, but a map? Meanwhile, NASA quietly released a short statement saying the signal was a result of natural magnetic resonance caused by solar wind. Interference. It was the same kind of explanation they'd used for unexplained radio bursts before. But the timing felt too convenient, and more importantly, their theory didn't account for the rhythmic structure or the repeating 39-pulse sequence. The Echo Group published a point-by-point rebuttal, showing that the magnetic resonance NASA described would have created irregular distortions, not perfect repetition. Behind the scenes, more clues began to surface. An anonymous source from the European Space Agency sent an encrypted email to one of the researchers with a simple message. "You're close. Check the harmonics." When they analyzed the harmonic frequencies, something remarkable happened. The hidden layer of the signal, the faint echo underneath, lined up perfectly with the harmonic structure of human speech. Not in content, but in rhythm. The pauses, the stresses, the intervals between tones, all mimicked the cadence of language. It wasn't random noise. It was communication. For weeks, the group tested hypothesis after hypothesis. They tried translating the sequence into binary code, then into ASCII text, and later into spectrographic images. Nothing coherent appeared, until one researcher noticed something subtle. When the binary data was rearranged into a 13x13 grid, reflecting the 13-hour interval between each signal burst, it revealed a repeating symbol, a ring-shaped pattern with a smaller point at its center. The same design appeared in several separate transmissions. When overlaid onto a star map, the symbol lined up almost perfectly with Atlas's current path, and the smaller dot matched Earth's orbital position. That realization sent a wave of unease through the group. The symbol wasn't abstract. It was directional. It pointed toward us. Some members wanted to go public immediately. Others argued to verify it first. But before they could decide, their shared data drive suddenly went offline. Their cloud storage accounts were locked and their access credentials revoked. At first, they thought it was a system error, but then their website was taken down under a DMCA takedown notice filed by an unknown entity. Someone didn't want that information circulating. Still, fragments of the data survived. A few of the researchers had backed up copies offline, and soon, new forums appeared where the work continued in secret. There, they took the analysis even further. One pattern stood out. Every time the signal pulsed, there was a minute shift in the background radiation surrounding it. The kind of shift that would only happen if the signal wasn't just being heard, but was physically affecting its surroundings. In other words, 3i Atlas might not only be sending a message, it could be manipulating the space around it. The implications were staggering. If the object could emit a signal powerful enough to bend local radiation, it wasn't just reflecting light. It was generating energy, intentionally or not. That kind of control implied technology, something far beyond human engineering. Some speculated it might be an ancient probe left by a long-gone civilization. Others thought it could be a beacon, repeating an automated distress call across the stars. A few even suggested something more unsettling, that it wasn't transmitting outward at all, but scanning, listening for a reply. By now, the story had grown far beyond a single mystery. Radio telescopes across the world began turning their attention toward Atlas's coordinates. Amateur astronomers joined in, uploading recordings, comparing data, sharing images. The strange pulse continued, steady as ever, every 13 hours, like a metronome echoing through the night sky. Then one night, something changed. The signal stopped. For the first time in months, there was silence. No pulse, no echo, no fluctuation. It was as if the source had gone dark. Observatories confirmed it within hours. Atlas was still visible, still reflecting light, but the transmission was gone. The question wasn't just why it stopped, but who or what decided to stop it. Some believed the signal had achieved its purpose. Others thought the interference came from something, or someone, trying to block it. But among the echo group, one theory quietly spread, that maybe, just maybe, the message had been received. When the signal went silent, NASA's reaction was immediate but hidden from public view. Deep inside the Goddard Space Flight Center, a meeting was called within hours. Key members from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory joined remotely, their screens flickering with classified data streams. On the surface, it was described as a routine anomaly review, but those who attended later said the atmosphere was anything but routine. The disappearance of the signal wasn't random. According to their data, it stopped mid-pulse, halfway through what should have been another 39-count sequence, as if someone had switched it off. Engineers replayed the final minutes over and over, searching for hardware malfunctions, software errors, or natural causes. None fit. The last pulse had carried a slightly different tone, a sharper, higher frequency that hadn't appeared before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But one analyst noticed it formed the same pattern the echo group had reported, the ring with a central dot. That detail was quietly flagged and moved into a separate file marked Restricted Distribution. Within 24 hours, a directive was sent to all partner observatories, instructing them to suspend analysis of anomalous deep space signals until further notice. The message was couched in bureaucratic language, a typical precaution, they said, to ensure data integrity. But inside NASA, several staff members understood the real reason. Something about that signal and its abrupt end had unsettled even the most seasoned scientists. At the same time, NASA's Public Affairs Division crafted a simple press release claiming the object had moved out of optimal range for observation, causing temporary signal loss. It was brief, carefully worded, and deliberately dull. The goal wasn't to explain, it was to calm. They hoped the story would fade, buried beneath the constant churn of daily headlines. But behind closed doors, a very different story was unfolding. In the secure lab known as Building 34, where classified astrophysics projects are reviewed, a small team analyzed the final transmission frame by frame. Using a proprietary AI system trained on pulsar data, they discovered something alarming. The signal's final spike, the sharp tone right before it stopped, wasn't random noise. When translated into a spectrogram, it showed a waveform that looked uncannily like a human voice, saying something short and low. It wasn't clear, but the pattern matched the rhythm of 2 syllables, repeating twice. The software's best phonetic approximation translated it as "stay back." For hours, the team argued about whether it was an artifact, a trick of pattern recognition. One senior scientist insisted it was interference caused by overlapping transmissions from Earth satellites, but another couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. She pointed out that the signal's final pulse matched the precise moment Earth's largest. Deep space radar in Goldstone had briefly pinged the region around Atlas. It was as if the object had heard us and replied. The next day, security protocols tightened. Access to all data related to 3I Atlas was locked under a new classification code, usually reserved for potential technological anomalies. Only a handful of senior scientists retained clearance, and most of them were reassigned to unrelated projects. Internally, the term echo event began appearing in encrypted memos, referring to the incident without naming it. The tone of those messages was cautious, almost fearful, hinting that whatever they had discovered might have implications beyond pure astronomy. Meanwhile, a few employees began to leak details anonymously. One of them, an engineer who'd worked in the Signal Analysis Division, sent a series of encrypted messages to an independent journalist, claiming NASA was sitting on evidence of structured communication. The messages included fragments of time-stamped data logs, showing discrepancies between the official public data and the classified version. The differences were small. A few milliseconds of altered timing, a missing spike here, an extra echo there. But they proved the agency had edited what it shared. The journalist tried to publish the story. Within hours, her article disappeared from the site, and her social media accounts were temporarily suspended. When they were restored, the posts about Atlas were gone. A quiet message appeared in her inbox from a government email address, warning her that continued disclosure of sensitive research could lead to legal consequences. She never wrote about Atlas again. Back inside NASA, frustration began to build among the scientists who wanted transparency. Many had devoted their lives to the search for knowledge, not secrecy. One astrophysicist privately recorded her thoughts, later leaked online. In her voice memo, she said, "It's not what we found that scares them. It's what it implies. If this thing was built, if it's responding, then it means we're not just studying space anymore. We're being observed." Her words echoed across forums and news sites, quickly going viral before being taken down again. The agency, meanwhile, moved deeper into silence. Satellite tracking of Atlas continued quietly, even though public observation logs showed no updates. The object's trajectory was recalculated several times, each time showing slight deviations that couldn't be explained by gravitational influence alone. It was as if something was guiding it, correcting its path by imperceptible degrees. Those changes were small, fractions of a degree, but in cosmic terms, they meant everything. In one late-night internal report, obtained later through leaks, a line stood out. Trajectory correction consistent with controlled deceleration. Possible non-natural origin. That phrase alone sparked a wave of speculation online. Was Atlas slowing down intentionally? If so, what was it preparing for? Weeks passed, and NASA maintained its public silence. Every official response became shorter, more evasive. We have no further updates at this time. The data is still under review. No anomalous behavior has been confirmed. But inside the scientific community, whispers grew louder. Some researchers quietly compared the Atlas data to historical anomalies. The WOW signal of 1977, the Oumuamua object in 2017, and noticed a chilling pattern. Each event had started with curiosity, followed by official dismissal, then sudden data disappearance. For many scientists, that pattern was proof of something larger. A recurring cover-up of discoveries that didn't fit conventional understanding. The difference this time was that too many eyes had already seen it. Independent researchers, amateur astronomers, data archivists, they all had fragments, enough to reconstruct a partial truth. And so, while NASA stayed silent, the world began piecing the story together without them. Observatories in Chile, Japan, and South Africa started releasing unfiltered logs of deep space scans. The data showed faint traces of the signal still echoing. Not gone, just weaker, as if fading into another frequency band. Some believed it had shifted intentionally, escaping detection by conventional instruments. Behind closed doors, NASA scientists met one final time before the internal file was archived. One attendee later described the mood as haunted. When someone asked if they should attempt another transmission, the project lead reportedly answered, "No, we've already been heard." The room fell silent after that. Outside, the public never knew the details. To them, Atlas was just another comet-like object passing quietly through the void. But for those who had seen the real data, the question lingered. If it wasn't a comet, and it wasn't a natural signal, then what exactly had answered us from the dark? In the weeks that followed the silence, the sky began to change in ways most people couldn't see. At least, not yet. Astronomers were the first to notice it. Tiny variations in star positioning, fractions of a degree off from expected coordinates, began appearing in deep sky scans. At first, they blamed atmospheric distortion or software calibration errors. But as data from multiple observatories came in, one unsettling detail became clear. The same pattern appeared everywhere. The shift wasn't random. It seemed to ripple outward from the region where 3i Atlas had last been tracked. Stars near that point showed the faintest flicker in luminosity, as if something invisible had brushed across them. In spectral data, faint distortions appeared. Wavelengths bending just enough to suggest a disturbance, like a gravitational lens passing between Earth and the distant light. Only this one didn't move like a planet or a black hole. It moved slowly, deliberately, against the expected current of the galaxy. Astronomers compared notes privately through encrypted channels. They were hesitant to post findings publicly. Too many of them had already been warned after discussing Atlas online. Still, screenshots leaked. Images from Chile's Cerro Tololo Observatory, a small circle of distortion outlined in red, began circulating on Reddit and astronomy forums. The caption was simple: "It's still out there." Amateur stargazers began noticing strange anomalies too. Time-lapse recordings from backyard telescopes showed faint trails of light that didn't match any known satellite path. They moved too smoothly, too silently, often against the rotation of the Earth. When analyzed, these trails pointed toward the same region, the one Atlas had come from. In Utah, a group of astrophotographers captured something even stranger. During a 12-hour exposure of the Orion Arm, one faint streak appeared, brightened slightly, then vanished. Not moving out of frame, but simply gone, as if it had blinked out of existence. They checked for cosmic rays, data corruption, anything that could explain it. Nothing did. When they aligned their coordinates later, they realized it intersected precisely with Atlas's calculated outbound trajectory. The pattern grew harder to ignore. Minor fluctuations in the Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic frequencies of Earth, were recorded by monitoring stations around the world. Normally, these frequencies are stable, tied to lightning and atmospheric charge. But now, readings showed subtle, rhythmic pulses repeating every 39 hours. The same number of pulses as the Atlas signal before it vanished. Scientists in Europe began to question whether the object's influence might extend beyond gravity or light. Could something about its movement, its energy, be affecting the fabric of electromagnetic space around Earth? Most dismissed it as coincidence, but deep down, even the skeptics felt a quiet unease. For ordinary people, the first visible signs came as simple beauty: brighter skies, sharper stars, and odd patterns in auroras that spread further south than ever before. Social media filled with photos of glowing skies over places that had never seen them before. Green and purple ribbons danced above cities like Denver, Paris, and Tokyo. People called it magical, mesmerizing. But to those studying it closely, something was wrong. The auroras pulsed in cycles, the same repeating intervals that matched the now infamous 39-count pattern. Then came the radio static. Shortwave operators began reporting strange interference, faint hums layered beneath normal broadcasts. Some recorded the sound, a low rising tone followed by two sharp pulses. Listeners joked that it sounded like Morse code from the stars. But when someone slowed it down, the pattern matched the final burst NASA had logged from Atlas before cutting the feed. By now, whispers had returned across the scientific community. A few retired NASA scientists started appearing on podcasts under pseudonyms, claiming they had seen similar data decades ago, during the Oumuamua passage in 2017. One described it as a gentle rewriting of space, as if something was rearranging how gravity worked in small, precise zones. The host asked if he thought it was intelligent. The man paused for a long time before saying, "If it isn't, then it's the most organized accident in the universe." Meanwhile, something else was happening in the night sky. Planetary ephemerides, the precise maps predicting where planets appear in the sky, began drifting ever so slightly off track. Software used by observatories to predict Jupiter's position was now off by seconds, then minutes. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but mathematically, the system was misaligned. The entire celestial map had shifted by a fraction, as though space itself had adjusted, subtly rewritten to accommodate a new mass or influence. Conspiracy theories exploded online. Some claimed a cloaked object was hiding between Mars and Jupiter. Others believed Atlas had released something, a kind of probe or signal field, that was now expanding, distorting light and data as it grew. One viral thread suggested it wasn't moving away from Earth at all. It was surrounding us. In New Mexico, a retired radar technician picked up what he described as echo shadows, faint reflections appearing on radar sweeps, with no physical objects attached. They seemed to form a ring that shifted location depending on solar wind conditions. When he traced their path, it formed a looping curve that matched the exact exit trajectory of Atlas's last known vector. He sent his findings to multiple research agencies. None replied. Astronomers at a private observatory in Australia decided to do their own sky survey, free from official oversight. Their data showed small gravitational perturbations, consistent with something massive but invisible passing between us and the outer planets. The numbers didn't add up to any known asteroid or dwarf planet. It was new, unregistered, and silent. The lead astronomer, a man who had spent 30 years studying exoplanets, couldn't explain it. "It's like the sky is breathing," he said in a late-night interview. "Every time we measure, it's slightly different, like something's shifting reality itself, piece by piece." Meanwhile, NASA's public silence continued. But independent researchers noticed subtle updates to the official star catalogues. Coordinates for certain objects had been revised quietly, without public explanation. When one analyst compared archived versions, he realized the adjustments aligned perfectly with the areas showing those light distortions. Someone, somewhere, was trying to correct the sky. Then one night, an astronomer in Finland uploaded a time-lapse of the northern sky. Midway through the video, a faint circular ripple appeared, a distortion, almost invisible unless you slowed it down. It expanded outwards slowly, like a ripple in a pond after a stone's been dropped. But there was no source, no object, nothing visible that could have caused it. The clip spread quickly, millions watching, wondering what they had just seen, and through it all, one quiet truth began to surface. Atlas hadn't vanished. It had changed something fundamental, not in itself, but in us, in the world, in the very way space reached our eyes and instruments. Something was rewriting the sky, not with destruction or noise, but with silence, precision, and purpose. It began with a single anonymous post on an obscure radio astronomy forum, a place where hobbyists and scientists sometimes shared raw data from deep space receivers. The user who made the post went by the name Signal Archive. They didn't give any details, no location, no background, just a brief caption that read, "This was never meant to be heard." Attached to it was a single audio file, no longer than 30 seconds. At first, no one paid much attention. People thought it was just another hoax, one of many strange sounds uploaded every week claiming to come from space. But then a few researchers decided to analyze it, and what they found started a wave of confusion that spread across the astronomy community. The sound itself was subtle, a low hum buried under static, like a heartbeat echoing through fog. But when the signal was cleaned and processed, patterns began to appear. It wasn't random noise. It had structure, rhythm, and what looked like mathematical spacing. Even more chilling, the signals seemed to repeat at precise intervals, synchronized with the movement of 3I Atlas as it passed through a specific region near the outer solar system. It was as if the object was responding to something, or worse, broadcasting something. NASA refused to comment, but internal sources hinted that the pattern had indeed been picked up months earlier by one of their deep space listening arrays before being classified. The data was never meant to be public. What troubled scientists the most wasn't just the precision of the signal, but its timing. It began the exact day 3I Atlas entered the heliosheath, the turbulent boundary where solar winds crash against interstellar space. In other words, the very edge of our solar system. It was like crossing a threshold, and the signal was the knock on the door. As the story spread, more data analysts began running their own simulations. A small team in Arizona claimed the transmission wasn't just a sound. It was a modulation containing coordinates. When those coordinates were plotted on a star map, they pointed not to an empty void, but to a sector known for an unexplained anomaly. A region of deep space where radio waves often vanish for reasons we still can't explain. The same region researchers had already linked to the possible origin of 3I Atlas. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. The signal wasn't constant. It evolved. Every few days, new versions were uploaded to the forum, each slightly different, as though something was updating it. Someone or something was adding data. No one knew if the anonymous poster was behind it or if they were just a messenger. Linguists, mathematicians, and cryptographers all tried decoding it. Some said it resembled a prime number sequence. Others said it mapped out orbital paths. But one detail stood out. The progression of the signal mirrored the movement of 3I Atlas as it approached the inner planets. The object's path and the transmission's evolution were in sync. Then, one evening, something even more bizarre happened. Observatories in Chile and Hawaii reported a sudden burst of electromagnetic energy, short, sharp, and directed, that matched the same frequency range as the leaked signal. It only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough to overload some instruments. Hours later, the forum that hosted the Signal Archive account went offline without warning. Every post, every thread, every file, gone. The account itself vanished as if it had never existed. Independent astronomers scrambled to verify what had happened, but by then it was too late. The data trail had gone cold. Only fragments of the signal survived on private backups and downloaded copies, passed quietly among researchers too afraid to speak publicly. Some claim to have found hidden data inside the sound file, a compressed layer of binary code that, when visualized, produced a pattern resembling a spiral galaxy. Others said that was nonsense, just digital noise amplified by imagination. Still, one fact couldn't be denied. Every time the signal appeared, 3I Atlas seemed to react. Subtle changes in its brightness, minor fluctuations in its trajectory. As if the object itself was aware of the transmission, radio telescopes began to monitor it constantly. But each time scientists tuned in, the noise grew weaker, more distant, almost like a voice fading out mid-sentence. It left behind a haunting question. Was the signal coming from 3I Atlas, or was it being sent to it? If it was the latter, then who, or what, was on the other end? When word reached mainstream media, it was quickly dismissed as an internet myth. Another wow signal for the conspiracy era. But among researchers who had actually seen the raw data, there was no laughter, only silence. They knew what the public didn't. The same coordinates from the signal appeared again in a decades-old Soviet transmission log, one that recorded a nearly identical burst detected in 1983, long before 3I Atlas even existed. The two signals, separated by more than 40 years, were almost identical in structure. That discovery reopened an old theory, that 3I Atlas might not be a natural object at all, but a vessel, a fragment, or even a beacon left adrift from a civilization long gone, something ancient, passing quietly through our solar system, occasionally waking to send a message, not to us, but to something else out there. The lost transmission remains one of the most debated mysteries connected to 3I Atlas. Some call it a hoax, others call it the first real proof that we are not alone. But everyone agrees on one thing. Whatever the signal was, it was never meant to reach human ears. It started quietly, with a single observation that almost went unnoticed. A research assistant at the European Southern Observatory named Clara Hensley was reviewing old sky survey data, searching for background calibration errors in the region where 3I Atlas had first been detected. But something about the numbers refused to fit. When she compared the object's present trajectory with historical observations, faint correlations appeared, lines that shouldn't exist, signals that seemed to echo through time. At first, she thought it was coincidence or perhaps data contamination. But the deeper she looked, the clearer the pattern became. The direction of 3I Atlas, its angle of entry, even the curve of its path through the solar system, all pointed to a region of space already marked in ancient records. Buried in dusty museum archives were star charts from Babylon and Alexandria, describing a wandering flame that crossed the heavens once every age. Chinese chronicles mentioned a ghost star moving against the night sky, its tail vanishing as if swallowed by the void. The stories had always been dismissed as legend. Now they looked strangely familiar. Clara began comparing the ancient sketches with modern data, layering one over the other. When the coordinates aligned within a few degrees, her pulse quickened. The same region of the sky, the same angle of descent, thousands of years apart yet identical. If these records were accurate, it meant 3I Atlas might not be a random visitor at all. It could be returning. Her findings stirred quiet alarm in the small group of scientists she trusted. They gathered late at night over encrypted calls, speaking in careful tones. Each of them began finding the same thing in different data sets, echoes, traces, and disruptions in the cosmic background that shouldn't be there. One physicist compared it to footprints repeating across centuries. Another called it a cosmic echo, as if the universe itself remembered each time the object passed by. But something even stranger emerged. When they mapped the timing of those earlier appearances, they noticed that each one corresponded with an abrupt historical event. Periods of unexplained environmental change, sudden leaps in technology, mysterious disappearances of ancient cultures. Around 1200 BC, the late Bronze Age collapse swept across civilizations. Around 536 AD, a dimming of the sun cast the world into years of cold and famine. And now, as 3I Atlas approached again, the world was entering another age of turbulence. The alignment felt impossible to ignore. Clara wasn't the only one searching for answers. Independent historians began digging through temple carvings and ancient manuscripts, finding symbols that matched the object's shape. A narrow body with a burning edge. In South America, Mayan codices described a silent fire that crossed the stars, followed by a period of darkness and rebirth. Egyptian texts spoke of a celestial visitor whose arrival brought both knowledge and destruction. Across continents, stories repeated. A messenger from the sky, a bringer of change. When Clara's preliminary paper was leaked online, it exploded across the scientific community. Some called it groundbreaking. Others dismissed it as pseudoscience. Within 48 hours, the document vanished from every academic server. The official reason cited methodological concerns, but those who had downloaded it early noticed something unsettling. The footnotes referenced classified NASA datasets never meant for public use. That suggested someone, somewhere, had already known about these patterns and kept them hidden. Rumors spread of a closed-door meeting between space agencies and defense departments. The goal, according to a source inside the European Space Agency, was to determine whether 3I Atlas posed a recurring threat, or if its influence extended beyond gravitational physics. What frightened them most wasn't its size or speed, but the possibility that its presence coincided with signals that seemed to awaken when it came close. Then, a new discovery deepened the mystery. Oceanic survey teams, scanning the Pacific floor for volcanic activity, detected metallic fragments embedded in the crust, fragments unlike any known terrestrial alloy. They matched the vector of a centuries-old meteor impact, one that had never been fully explained. The fragment's isotopic ratio matched the trace composition recently measured in 3I Atlas's coma. If the analysis was correct, a piece of the same object, or one like it, had already been here. Whispers began to circulate among astronomers. Maybe the ancient observers hadn't simply seen a comet. Maybe they'd witnessed something passing close enough to leave its mark, something intelligent enough to return along the same invisible road through space. Some even speculated it could be following a cycle, visiting systems at precise intervals as part of a pattern larger than human history itself. As the days went on, Clara found herself staring at the night sky, unable to shake the feeling that she wasn't just studying data, she was studying memory. The universe, vast and silent, seemed to be telling a story that humanity had only half heard. The same object seen by ancient eyes was once again visible through the most powerful telescopes of our time, repeating its arc like a cosmic echo that refused to fade. If these echoes were real, then 3I Atlas wasn't simply passing through. It was part of something older, something cyclical, a loop that connected the rise and fall of civilizations to the motion of the stars. And as the object drew nearer, she began to wonder whether history was repeating itself once again. The day began like any other at the Mount Graham Observatory in Arizona, quiet except for the faint hum of machinery and the rhythmic sweep of the telescope as it tracked the night sky. But something unusual appeared on the instruments just after midnight. A faint distortion shimmered near the path of 3I Atlas, subtle at first, then undeniable. The readings made no sense. Light behind the object seemed to bend, curving in ways the computer couldn't simulate. For a brief moment, it looked as though space itself had rippled. Dr. Michael Graves, the observatory's director, leaned closer to the display. He'd spent 3 decades studying gravitational fields, yet what he saw that night felt like a whisper from the impossible. The sensors were registering a lensing effect, a warping of light that could only occur in the presence of extreme gravity. But the calculations didn't add up. 3I Atlas wasn't massive enough to do that. Something else was with it. When he increased the magnification, the distortion seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. Data logs showed the same pattern repeating every 11 minutes. Steady, deliberate, unnatural. Michael froze, feeling a chill creep through the control room. He had seen similar signatures before, but only in simulations involving event horizons, the edge of black holes where time and space collapse. But this wasn't near any known black hole. Whatever was causing it was moving with the comet. By dawn, word had reached several observatories around the world. At first, the findings were treated as a data anomaly, perhaps a miscalibration, but then Japan's Subaru telescope confirmed it, followed by independent verification from Chile's Atacama facility. The same pulse, the same gravitational ripple, and each day, as 3I Atlas drifted closer to the inner solar system, the signal grew stronger. Scientists began arguing over possibilities. Could it be a fragment of exotic matter, or perhaps an interaction between dark energy and magnetic fields? Others whispered darker theories. If this was a true gravitational lens, it might mean something far more massive was hidden just beyond visual range, traveling in sync with 3I Atlas. Some even suggested it could be artificial, an engine of unknown design manipulating gravity itself. In Washington, an emergency briefing was held behind closed doors. The leaked agenda referred to non-terrestrial gravitational phenomena. Intelligence officials demanded to know whether the object posed a risk to Earth's orbit. NASA's director simply replied, "Not yet, but it's getting closer." Meanwhile, independent astronomers monitoring the signal noticed something else, a faint pattern embedded in the distortion. When converted into sound frequencies, it formed a low, rhythmic tone. Some described it as mechanical. Others said it felt alive. When slowed down, the tone revealed a strange cadence, as if carrying structure. A pulse, then a pause, then 3 shorter beats, repeated endlessly, hour after hour. Michael couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the data, Zooming deeper into the frames, the light around the object flickered in strange synchronization, like coded blinking. What unsettled him most wasn't the data, it was the silence that followed. Normally, when a discovery like this emerged, the scientific community would erupt with debate. But after the third day, public data feeds went offline. Observatories stopped posting updates. Even internal networks began to close. Someone, somewhere, had decided to lock it all down. A week later, satellite operators began noticing minor signal disruptions. Nothing dramatic, just faint flickers, short outages like static on an old television. But they always coincided with 3i Atlas's position in the sky. Then came the report from a deep space communications array in Australia. Their instruments picked up a burst of radio energy so powerful, it briefly overwhelmed the entire southern network. The source, the same coordinates as 3i Atlas NASA, called it a natural event, a solar reflection. But Michael knew better. The timing matched the gravitational pulses perfectly. And within that burst, hidden deep in the signal, was a pattern eerily similar to the tone they'd converted earlier. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Days blurred into nights as he analyzed the data obsessively. The signal seemed to contain layers, like pages folded into one another. The more he decoded, the more it felt intentional. There was symmetry, rhythm, even variation. It was as if the object wasn't just bending gravity, it was using it to send information. A message written into the very fabric of space-time. By the time he presented his findings to the internal review board, the atmosphere was tense. Security guards stood by the doors. Every device had been disabled. Michael laid out the evidence, speaking in a calm, steady voice, even as he felt the weight of something immense pressing down on the room. He explained how the data suggested that 3i Atlas was not alone, that it might be accompanied or guided by a force capable of manipulating light and time. One official interrupted him. "Are you suggesting it's sentient?" The room went silent. Michael didn't answer directly. He only played the audio, the pulsing tone that echoed softly through the speakers. The rhythm filled the room, steady and cold. When it ended, no one spoke. Later that night, as he drove home through the desert, he looked up and saw the comet's faint tail stretching across the sky, a thin white scar above the black horizon. For the first time in his life, he felt the sky watching him back. The event horizon wasn't somewhere distant in the cosmos anymore. It was coming closer, inch by inch, carried by something that defied everything humans thought they knew about the universe. It started quietly, almost like a whisper in the background of the world. At first, it was nothing more than small glitches, minor satellite communication drops, radar interference, and faint static interrupting long-range transmissions. Engineers blamed solar flares or cosmic dust. It seemed harmless enough, but then the interruptions grew stronger, longer, and strangely synchronized. They followed 3i Atlas's movement through the sky like a shadow no one could explain. In New York, air traffic control experienced a 2-minute blackout, during which every radar screen went dark. At that exact moment, halfway across the planet, an oceanographic satellite above the Indian Ocean lost contact for the same duration. The odds of those events lining up perfectly were practically zero, yet the pattern continued to repeat, pulsing in rhythm with the gravitational fluctuations first detected weeks earlier. Within days, networks around the world began to fail in strange, unpredictable ways. Internet backbones flickered, GPS systems drifted miles off course, and power grids experienced cascading surges that tripped entire cities offline for hours. It wasn't chaos, not yet, but it was enough to make governments nervous. For the first time, whispers of containment began circulating among global agencies. The official explanation was solar interference, but behind closed doors, scientists knew something far more complex was happening. Dr. Michael Graves sat in his dim office, staring at the real-time feed of the disruption pattern. Every pulse seemed to carry information. A coded rhythm buried beneath the electromagnetic storm. The deeper he analyzed, the clearer it became that the blackouts weren't random. They were organized, structured, as if they were part of a deliberate sequence, unfolding step by step. What unsettled him most was the precision. Each wave of interference hit regions in perfect geometric alignment with 3i Atlas's projected trajectory. Meanwhile, the public began to notice. Television broadcasts flickered with static, streaming services went dark mid-program, and phone networks dropped calls simultaneously in multiple countries. Social media filled with theories, alien contact, government experiments, even biblical prophecies. The world was awake, confused, and watching the sky. On the fifth day of disruptions, something happened that no one could ignore. The International Space Station reported a total communications blackout lasting nearly 6 minutes. During that time, astronauts claimed they saw flashes of light outside their viewport, not from the sun, but from deep space, a rhythmic pattern of illumination, slow and deliberate, like distant Morse code. When contact was restored, NASA ordered an immediate lockdown of all live feeds. The archived footage from the ISS cameras was removed within minutes. Power outages swept through parts of South America and Europe the following night. Whole cities glowed red as backup systems kicked in, painting skylines in emergency light. Airplanes were rerouted, stock markets froze, and digital clocks across several time zones began to desynchronize. By exactly 11 minutes, the same interval seen in the gravitational pulses, it was as if time itself was being rewritten in small, invisible steps. Governments began issuing public reassurances, insisting that everything was under control. But internally, chaos was spreading. The blackout patterns suggested intentionality, each wave following a predictable path, sweeping across Earth like a scanning beam. Intelligence agencies warned that if this continued, it could destabilize global infrastructure. Some speculated that it wasn't just interference, it was reconnaissance, a form of observation, perhaps mapping human systems on a planetary scale. Then came the quiet hour. Across multiple continents, for exactly 60 minutes, every major form of communication, radio, satellite, internet, went silent. Not disrupted, not jammed, just silent. The electromagnetic noise that normally filled the air vanished. Even background static disappeared. For one eerie hour, the planet felt completely still. No signals, no transmissions, just the low hum of the Earth itself. When systems came back online, global monitoring stations detected a faint residual frequency, identical to the one first traced near 3i Atlas. It had shifted slightly lower, moving toward the resonance of human brainwaves. No one could explain how that was possible. The signal wasn't just affecting machines anymore. Hospitals reported surges in patients complaining of sudden dizziness, nausea, and vivid dreams about light moving through the sky. Michael's team analyzed brain scan data from volunteers during the blackout. In every case, the neural patterns showed brief synchronization spikes, moments where their brain activity aligned perfectly with the signal's rhythm. It was as if something had reached through the static and touched the human mind itself. Behind the scenes, the world's major powers moved towards secrecy. Global internet hubs were temporarily rerouted through secure military networks. News outlets were given revised scripts and advised not to link the outages to 3i Atlas. But fragments of truth still leaked through. Radio amateurs picked up faint echoes of the original tone embedded within civilian channels. The message was spreading, whether anyone wanted it to or not. In homes across America, people began reporting a strange phenomenon during the night. Electronic clocks flickered between times. Television screens showed ghost images, flashes of stars, swirling dust, and a thin white arc resembling a tail. Some said it looked like a comet. Others swore they saw shapes inside the light. Michael stayed awake through it all, piecing together the data as the blackouts spread further east. Each new surge felt closer, more intimate, It wasn't just about power grids or satellites anymore. The world's nervous system, its communication web, was being rewritten, pulsing with an intelligence that was no longer hiding. The blackout was not an accident. It was a message delivered through silence, a warning from something that understood how humanity connected, and how easily it could all be undone. And somewhere in that quiet hour, for the first time since the signal began, Earth responded, not through words, but through the collective heartbeat of billions of people staring at the same dark sky, wondering what was watching back. Across the silent span of the night sky, a strange stillness had settled. Telescopes all around the world began to capture something new. Faint arcs of light, moving in perfect sync, tracing invisible paths that seemed to converge on one point. Astronomers called it the alignment, though no one could yet explain what exactly was aligning. Some said it was just a pattern of coincidence, that space often played tricks on the human eye, but those who looked deeper saw something else. The lines weren't random, they were part of a design. Weeks earlier, scientists had noticed 3I Atlas slowing down slightly, as if reacting to something unseen or adjusting its course. That small deceleration changed everything. The new data revealed its path would intersect not just near Earth's orbit, but through a precise region where several ancient celestial markers lined up. Markers humans had been watching for thousands of years. From the pyramids of Giza to the Nazca lines of Peru, ancient civilizations seemed to point toward this exact alignment, as if they had known this moment would come. Late one night, the Deep Space Network picked up a faint pulse, rhythmic, steady, almost like a countdown. It wasn't random interference, it was a repeating signal, spaced exactly every 88 minutes. The same period of orbit as a low Earth satellite. At first, analysts dismissed it as a glitch. But when they compared it with data from the James Webb Telescope, they found the source wasn't near Earth at all. It was coming from 3I Atlas itself. The signal grew stronger over days. It carried no message that humans could decode. No voice, no language, just the same low pulse echoing through the background of space. And then something happened that no one could explain. The pulse synced perfectly with the Earth's magnetic field. For a brief moment, readings across observatories all over the planet went dark, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. When power returned, radiologs showed something chilling. Just before the blackout, the pulse had changed, not in frequency but in tone. Experts described it as a human-like pattern, similar to the rhythm of a heartbeat. For a few seconds, the cosmos felt alive, as though it was responding. People all over the world shared the recordings online, debating what it meant. Some said it was a natural phenomenon. Others believed it was the first true sign of communication. In the days that followed, new data revealed that Atlas was now releasing a faint electromagnetic trail, almost like breadcrumbs, across the stars. Each trail pointed toward one constellation, Orion. For centuries, Orion had been considered a cosmic compass, a pattern that ancient cultures associated with gods, hunters, and gateways between worlds. Was this just another coincidence? Or was Atlas showing us where to look next? Governments went quiet again. No new press releases, no telescope images, no statements from NASA, ESA, or China's CNSA. Yet leaks continued to appear online. Blurry screenshots, encrypted data packets, voice clips of analysts whispering about the sequence. The term spread quickly across social media. The sequence became a symbol of something bigger than science. It became a mystery that everyone wanted to solve. Then one night, something subtle happened. Viewers who were watching a live NASA feed claimed to see a flicker, a shape behind the sun, like a dark curve bending the light. The feed cut out instantly. Minutes later, the official stream returned, but that moment had already been captured, replayed, and slowed down by thousands of people. The pattern of that dark shape matched the same orbital geometry of 3I Atlas. It wasn't behind the sun by chance. It was aligning, Astrophysicists tried to calm the public, saying it was just a camera error or a compression glitch. But those who had seen it knew better. The alignment wasn't symbolic anymore, it was real. The data, the timing, the energy shifts, they all pointed to something scheduled, something inevitable. Atlas wasn't just passing through, it was arriving. And as we watched that glowing traveler reach the point where paths of light from ancient monuments and modern satellites all met, a quiet understanding began to spread. Maybe humanity had been watching for this moment far longer than we realized. Maybe deep down, we've always known that one day, something out there would look back at us. The pulse continues even now. Faint, steady, alive. Some say it's just a dying comet, sputtering through the void. Others believe it's something more. A signal waiting for the right moment, the right listener. Whatever it is, one truth remains. The alignment has begun, and once it completes, the night sky may never look the same again. If you're still here watching, thank you for exploring the unknown with us. Every like, every share, every new subscriber helps us keep diving deeper into the mysteries that others are too afraid to question. So, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who loves the stars as much as you do, because the story of 3i Atlas isn't over yet. In fact, it might just be beginning.